I'm Michael. I'm 26 and I live a pretty average life in Richmond, Virginia. I work as an HVAC technician for a small but solid company. It's not glamorous, but it keeps the lights on and the fridge full, and I don't mind getting my hands dirty. My routine is basic: work, gym, maybe a few beers with the guys on Fridays. I rent a modest one-story house in a quiet neighborhood where everyone mostly keeps to themselves. Nothing dramatic. That is, until last Tuesday. Across the street from me live the Alvarezes, Daniel and Sophia. They're the couple everyone notices. Big brick house, expensive cars, perfectly trimmed hedges. They always look like a magazine family, matching jogging outfits on Sunday mornings. Holiday decorations out before anyone else. Smiles that looked just a little too polished. I never thought much of them beyond polite waves across the street. That night, I was fixing up my truck in the driveway when I realized I left my socket wrench at a buddy's house. I figured I'd borrow one from Daniel. We'd shared tools before. Nothing major, just neighborly stuff. I crossed the street. The sky was fading into that soft purple you only get in early fall. Porch lights were coming on. Their house looked quiet. No music, no laughter like usual. I rang the bell. When the door swung open, it wasn't Daniel who answered. It was Sophia. She looked like she'd stepped out of a dream and then stumbled through a storm. She was barefoot, standing there in a cross-strap dress that clung to her in a way that made my brain stutter. Burgundy, soft fabric, short enough that I glanced down and then right back up. Her makeup was smudged beneath her eyes, not from a night out, but from crying. There was this lost look on her face. That sharp confidence she always wore like perfume was gone. She looked raw, real. "Michael?" she asked, like it took her a second to recognize me. "Hey, sorry to bother you. I was just wondering if Daniel's home," I said. "I needed to borrow a wrench real quick." Her eyes flickered and she let out a shaky breath, the kind that tries not to crack but fails anyway. "He's not here." I nodded awkwardly. "No worries, I'll come back another time." "Wait," she said, stepping back from the door. "You can come in. I could use some company, just for a bit." I hesitated. This wasn't the Sophia I'd waved at from across the street. This was someone different, someone unraveling. Inside, the house didn't look like the usual showroom. A half-empty bottle of wine was on the counter. One glass with a smudged lipstick mark sat next to it. A pair of his shoes were tossed near the door, like someone left in a hurry. The scent of jasmine still hung in the air, but there was tension beneath it, the kind you don't need to see to feel. She gestured to the couch, then sat down herself, pulling her knees up under her dress in a way that looked too vulnerable for someone who once gave off nothing but power. "I kicked him out," she said softly. "Daniel." I sat down carefully on the edge of the couch. I didn't know things were— "No one did," she said, eyes glassy. "He's been cheating for years, apparently." I finally stopped pretending not to notice. The room went quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. She wiped at her face, smearing the last of her mascara away, then looked at me like she just remembered I was still there. "Sorry," she muttered. "You came for a wrench, not this." "It's fine," I said. "I don't mind staying a bit." She nodded slowly, her hand fiddling with the edge of a throw pillow. I noticed then how delicate her fingers looked, how tightly she gripped the fabric, like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. "I thought if I looked perfect, acted perfect, he'd eventually stop," she whispered. "Guess I just didn't want to be alone." I didn't know what to say to that. I'm not a therapist. I'm just the neighbor who happened to knock at the right or wrong time. So I just sat there, quiet, present. I didn't say much that night, didn't need to. Sometimes, just being there is enough. Sophia sat with her knees tucked to her chest on one side of the couch, head resting against the cushion, eyes drifting between the floor and the wine glass she hadn't touched in a while. I stayed on the other end, hands resting in my lap, watching the ice slowly melt in a cup of water she'd handed me earlier. The air was still but heavy. You could feel the echoes of old arguments in the silence. The living room didn't look like the version of it I'd glimpsed through their open windows all those years. There were tissues scattered on the coffee table, a throw blanket balled up at her feet, and a faint lipstick stain on the rim of the wine bottle itself. Whatever mask she usually wore outside had clearly been tossed aside the moment Daniel walked out the door. "I always told myself I was strong," she murmured, voice so soft I barely heard it. "But I let him walk all over me for years." Her satin slip dress clung gently to her legs when she shifted, the light from the floor lamp casting a warm glow against her shoulder. It was the kind of image that would have short-circuited me a few weeks ago, but tonight it just made her look human, tired, fragile. "You were strong," I said, not trying to sound deep or anything, just honest. "You did what you had to do to survive it. Sometimes that's the hardest kind of strength." She didn't reply right away, just looked at me for a long moment, like she was searching for something in my expression. Some kind of judgment, maybe, or disbelief. But I wasn't offering any. She let out a breath and curled tighter into the cushions. "He used to call me needy, like needing basic affection made me weak." I didn't know Daniel personally. We waved a few times, borrowed tools, maybe passed each other on trash day. But right then, I didn't care if I'd ever spoken a word to him. I hated the way she said that word, needy, like it had been carved into her. "You're not needy," I said. "You're just real. That's rare." Her lip twitched at that, not quite a smile, but something close. The clock on the wall ticked softly. I could hear the crickets outside starting their nightly chorus, the occasional car passing in the distance. But in the room, it was still just us in the silence. "Why'd you really come over?" she asked suddenly, her eyes narrowing. Not suspicious, just curious. I chuckled lightly, holding up my empty wrench hand. "I really did need the tool. That wasn't a line." She laughed for real this time, and the sound was the first thing all evening that felt light. "Well," she said, stretching out her legs, the hem of her dress riding a bit higher than before, "not on purpose, just comfort. Guess I should be glad I answered the door for once." A beat passed, she leaned back, looking more relaxed than she had when I first walked in, her head tilted against the cushion, and her voice softened again. "You don't have to stay, Michael. I'm not trying to trap you in my mess." "I know," I said, "but I'm not in a rush either." Something about that seemed to settle her. She reached for the remote, lowered the volume on the low background music she must have forgotten was even playing. It was some mellow jazz station, the kind of thing you put on when you want company, but not conversation. "I used to imagine what it would be like to just start over," she said. "New house, new life, no memories built into the walls." I nodded. "You don't have to go anywhere to start over." She looked at me again, her eyes softer now, not as glassy. "You're young, Michael. You probably don't know what it's like to lose years to someone who keeps taking pieces of you." "I might be younger," I said carefully, "but I've seen what that looks like. And I can tell you those pieces, you can take them back." She stared at me for a pawing moment. Then, without a word, she leaned over, not all the way, not dramatically, but enough that her head rested gently against my shoulder. I didn't move, didn't speak, just breathed slowly and let her stay there. Eventually, her breath evened out. I could feel the warmth of her skin through the thin fabric of her dress. Her hair smelled like lavender and something faintly sweet, maybe her shampoo. For the first time since I'd stepped foot in her house, she looked calm. Not fixed, not healed, but calm. I stayed like that for a while, letting her sleep, watching the shadows dance across the ceiling. Maybe it was the wine or the silence or the way she curled in like she finally felt safe. But I knew right then something had changed. I woke up with a crick in my neck and the weight of Sophia's head still resting against my shoulder. Morning light was bleeding through the curtains, soft and gold, the kind that makes everything look better than it is. For a second, I didn't move. I just sat there, letting the quiet settle. Her breathing was slow and steady. She hadn't stirred. It felt weirdly peaceful, but also like I'd crossed into something delicate, uncharted. I turned my head slightly, careful not to wake her, and took in the room again. Same wine bottle, same tissues, same subtle perfume clinging to the throw blanket draped over her legs. The chaos from last night was still here, but somehow it didn't feel as loud. Eventually she shifted. She blinked slowly, confused for half a second, then straightened up with a quiet gasp. Oh my God, I didn't mean to. I didn't know I fell asleep. Her voice was raspy, like sleep hadn't fully let her go yet. It's okay, I said, giving a small smile. You needed rest. She rubbed her face, noticing the mascara smudged on her fingers. I must look like a disaster. I didn't respond because in that moment she didn't. Even in a slightly wrinkled silk robe, barely tied, slipping just enough to reveal the curve of her shoulder, she looked more like herself than the version I'd seen in heels and designer sunglasses across the street all these years. I'll make coffee, she said quickly, getting up and pulling the robe tighter around her. She moved through the room with a quiet urgency, trying to pretend everything was normal now. I stayed where I was for a beat longer, watching the way she brushed her hair back, the way she avoided eye contact. Like waking up next to me had reset some invisible boundaries she wasn't sure she'd meant to cross. In the kitchen, the sound of mugs clinking and the hum of the machine gave us a little buffer. I finally got up and joined her, and we stood there side by side, watching the coffee drip into the pot like it was going to solve everything. She handed me a mug without a word, then leaned back against the counter. Last night, she started, trailing off. You don't have to explain anything, I said, sipping the coffee. It was hot, bitter, exactly what I needed. She exhaled through her nose, her eyes still not quite meeting mine. It's just, I don't let people see me like that, ever. I nodded. I get it. You've been carrying a lot. You don't have to pretend around me. That seemed to hit her. Her eyes met mine for a moment, and she gave a small, grateful smile. You're different, Michael. I wasn't sure what to say to that. I just sipped the coffee. Later that morning, after she had showered and changed into jeans and a simple tee, we decided to go for a walk. Nothing planned, just needed air. The neighborhood looked different on foot, slower, quieter. We walked past houses we'd both seen for years but never talked about. Sophia stopped to admire a rose bush blooming outside someone's gate. I used to garden all the time, she said. Stopped when I stopped feeling like things were growing. It wasn't a metaphor, but it hit like one. You should start again, I said, even if it's just one pot on the porch. She gave me a look, part amused, part moved. You're full of quiet wisdom for someone who fixes air conditioners. I shrugged. Got to do something while the units are running diagnostics. She laughed, a real one, not forced, not tired, just real. It was the first time I'd heard her laugh like that, and I realized how much I liked the sound of it. We walked a little farther, and when we circled back toward her place, something shifted. She slowed as we reached the steps, then turned to face me. Thank you, she said softly. For what? For staying, for listening, for not trying to fix me. You're not broken, I replied, just healing. She stared at me like no one had ever said that to her before. Then she reached out and gently squeezed my hand, just for a second, but it said more than words. That moment on her doorstep, her hair pulled back, sunlight catching her skin, her bare ring finger drawing a quiet contrast to everything else. I don't think I'll forget it. Something small had changed between us, and neither of us was pretending anymore. It became a thing, me dropping by after work, not every night, but often enough that it didn't feel accidental anymore. Sometimes I'd bring coffee from the shop down the street. Other times, small things like a potted lavender plant I picked up on a whim or a bundle of sunflowers because they looked like something her porch needed. She'd roll her eyes in mock protest, but I could tell it meant something. Sophia was the kind of woman who didn't say much about what she liked, but you could read it in how long her smile stayed when you got it right. One Wednesday afternoon, I showed up with a bag of pastries and her favorite iced coffee, and she answered the door in one of those soft cotton summer dresses, navy blue with thin straps and a tie at the back that made me forget what I was holding. You always bring bribes, she teased, taking the bag from my hands. Only when I want to be invited to the porch, I said. She laughed and stepped aside. We sat on her porch swing that day, the kind that creaked a little when we rocked just right. She kept pulling her legs up under her, always in those bare feet with polished nails, hair loose around her shoulders. Sometimes she'd talk. Other times we just sat there watching the street, like it might tell us something new. She told me more about Daniel in bits and pieces, about how he traveled constantly, how he stopped asking how her day was, how she used to cook elaborate dinners, and he'd come home late without calling. I listened, never interrupted. It wasn't that she needed to vent. It was more like she was stitching her story back together, sifting through what was real and what had just been habit. One afternoon, she took off her wedding ring and held it in her palm for a while before sliding it back on. I didn't say anything. She wasn't ready yet, and I wasn't about to rush her. I could see she was wrestling with the weight of it, not just the metal, but what it meant to still wear it, even when the man was gone. But a few days later, I noticed it wasn't on her finger anymore. She didn't mention it, and I didn't ask. Instead, she poured me a glass of lemonade and sat next to me in a sundress that looked like it was made for the kind of woman who'd forgotten how beautiful she really was. She had her legs crossed, a small gold anklet catching the late sun. Her body had this quiet elegance, graceful without effort. When she leaned back, arms behind her head, eyes closed, I realized she was slowly turning into someone new. Or maybe returning to someone old, someone she used to be before life bent her out of shape. "Do you ever think about starting over?" she asked one evening, not looking at me. "All the time," I said. "What holds you back?" "Fear, comfort, routine. Same things that hold everyone back, I guess." She nodded slowly like she'd already had that answer in her head but needed to hear it out loud. Sometimes we just sat in silence, her head resting back against the swing, my hand inches from hers. I never pushed, never tried to reach for her, but the space between us got smaller every time. She started laughing more, smiling without apologizing for it. She talked about maybe going back to her old hobby, photography, even showed me some of her pictures tucked away in dusty albums under her bed. I helped her pull them out one lazy Sunday afternoon, sitting cross-legged on her living room rug while she flipped through pages of moments frozen in time. Moments from before Daniel, before all the pretending. "You've got a good eye," I told her. "I used to," she said, "before I lost it trying to please someone who never really saw me." "You didn't lose it," I said. "You just stopped looking for yourself." She stared at me, eyes soft but serious. "You always say these things that hit harder than they should." I shrugged, just telling the truth. After that, she started keeping fresh flowers in the kitchen again, cooked more, even if it was just for herself. I noticed the way her dresses fit a little differently, like she chose them because she liked how they felt, not because anyone else expected her to wear them. She still had her moments, days when she barely left her bedroom, or when the sound of a certain song would make her stare off like she was a million miles away. But she was coming back to life, one step at a time. If I had even a small part in that, I was okay just being the guy who brought the coffee and listened. It happened on a Tuesday evening. We'd just finished one of our usual walks. Nothing planned, just a loop around the neighborhood that had become our quiet ritual. Late summer hung thick in the air, and Sophia wore this dark green cocktail dress that caught the porch light just enough to make me forget how to speak for half a second. She told me earlier that she'd found it in the back of her closet, hadn't worn it in years, said it felt good to dress up for no reason. She didn't say it to impress me, but the way she caught me glancing told me she noticed. We walked slower than usual, her arm brushing mine every now and then. I could smell that familiar mix of jasmine and citrus from her perfume, and it clung to the night air even after we stopped moving. Back at her doorstep, she turned to me, keys in hand, and hesitated. Something was different in her eyes, uncertain, yes, but layered with something else, too. "Do you want to come in for a bit?" she asked, voice soft. It wasn't casual, and she knew it. I looked at her, then at the door, then back at her again. The pull was real, the temptation to follow her inside, to close that door behind us and let whatever was hanging in the air finally crash into something real. It was strong, but I didn't. Not because I didn't want to, because I wanted to too much. I gave a small, almost apologetic smile and said, "Maybe not tonight." She blinked just once, then tilted her head slightly, like she hadn't expected that answer. "You're sure?" "I am," I said gently, "but not because I don't want to." She studied me for a moment longer, then stepped back and leaned against the door frame, her hand still resting on the knob. "That's surprising," she said. "Most people in your position wouldn't hesitate." I met her gaze. "You're not most people." That made her go still. A long silence passed, the kind that stretches and presses on your ribs a little. Then she smiled, not wide, not showy, but with this quiet recognition, like something she hadn't let herself believe was suddenly possible. "You're different, Michael," she said, echoing something she'd told me once before. "That scares me more than I'd like to admit." I nodded. "You've been through enough. I don't want to be another thing that moves too fast and leaves." That hit her. I saw it in the way her shoulders eased, the way her fingers finally let go of the doorknob. "I used to think if I wasn't chosen first, I wasn't worth anything," she said. "So I let myself be someone's second option for years." "You're not second to anyone," I said, "and you don't have to prove anything to me." She didn't reply right away, just looked at me like I was rewriting something in her. Then without a word, she reached down and slipped off the ring she had stopped wearing, but kept on a chain around her neck. It made the faintest sound as it dropped into her palm. She looked at it for a long moment, then stepped inside and placed it in a small ceramic dish on the entryway table. When she came back out, she leaned against the doorway again, barefoot, her dress catching the soft breeze, her expression open in a way I'd never seen before. "I don't know what this is," she said, "but I know it's the first time in a long time I feel like I'm making the decision for myself." "That's all that matters," I said. She nodded slowly. Then, almost like a reflex, she reached up and touched my face, just a light brush of her fingers along my cheek. A touch so brief I could have imagined it if not for the way it lingered on my skin. "Thank you," she whispered, "for making me feel wanted without asking for anything in return." I didn't move. I didn't need to. She stepped back inside, and the door clicked shut with a kind of finality that didn't feel like an end. It felt like a turning point. I walked home that night with the memory of her standing there in that dress, the way she looked at me, and the quiet certainty that something between us had shifted again. A few weeks after that night on her doorstep, I handed Sophia a plain white envelope. She raised an eyebrow, cautiously amused. "You're not the type to write letters." "I'm not," I said. "Just open it." We were sitting on her porch again. She had her feet propped on the railing, a soft, cream-colored cardigan draped around her shoulders, coffee in hand. The air had cooled just enough that you could feel fall on the edge of every breeze. It was the kind of afternoon that made you want to hold on to time. She peeled the flap open, pulled out the 2 plane tickets, and stared at them. "San Diego," she read aloud. "2 nights, small hotel by the beach. Just a short break. Nothing fancy. Thought you might need a change of view." Sophia blinked a few times. This isn't just a sweet gesture. This is actual travel with logistics." I shrugged. "I figured you could use something that doesn't smell like Richmond or memory." She looked at the tickets again, then back at me. "You want me to say yes right now, don't you?" "No," I said. "You can say yes when you're ready." She didn't answer right away, but the corners of her mouth lifted. A quiet yes was already forming behind her hesitation. 3 days later, I stood in the airport pickup lane, watching her walk toward me in a fitted red mini dress and low heels, her hair falling in loose waves over her shoulders. She looked like she belonged on a magazine cover. Not because she was trying, but because, for once, she wasn't. "This is ridiculous," she said, sliding into the passenger seat of the rental car. "I haven't traveled without a plan, and I don't even know how long." "That's kind of the point," I said, pulling onto the freeway. We spent the first evening walking through Old Town. No itinerary, just letting the place happen to us. Sophia lit up around the old bookstores and sunlit patios. She bought handmade earrings from a street vendor, tried mango chili ice cream from a place that looked like it hadn't updated its signage since the 90s. It was easy in a way that surprised both of us. The next day, we wandered through small shops along the cliffs, stopped at a bistro with string lights and mismatched chairs, then sat on the beach until the light turned golden and the tide pulled the day quietly out to sea. At one point, she took off her sandals and waded ankle-deep into the water. Her dress fluttered just above her knees, and I couldn't help but watch her laugh at the cold, at the way the waves snuck up on her. "I used to hate the beach," she said, turning toward me. Daniel always made it about him. His photos, his plans, his pacing. It was never about just being here. I stood a few feet away, hands in my pockets, the water lapping over my shoes. And now, she smiled at me, calm and warm. Now I think I get it. We walked back toward the hotel slowly, sand stuck to our calves, the scent of salt water clinging to our clothes. At the front steps, she reached for my hand without asking, and I didn't let go. Later that night, under the low light of the hotel balcony, she leaned against the railing in a soft wraparound dress, hair slightly damp from her shower, wine glass resting in her hands. "I feel peaceful," she said. The way she said it, it wasn't casual. It sounded like an admission, like peace wasn't something she let herself have until now. "I like seeing you like this," I said. She turned toward me, eyes tracing mine. "You make it easy to feel safe, and harder to pretend I don't want more." I stepped closer. The breeze picked up just enough to lift a strand of her hair across her face. I reached up to tuck it behind her ear, and she leaned into the touch just slightly. No words this time. We stood there, our fingers still laced together from the walk back, and it was the most natural thing in the world. When she leaned in, her lips met mine with a kind of quiet certainty. No rush, no hesitation, just warmth, intention, and something that felt deeper than either of us had expected. She didn't pull away for a long time. When we finally did, she didn't speak. She just rested her head against my chest, our arms wrapped around each other, the stars stretching wide over the coast. For the first time since I'd met her, I didn't see the woman who had been left behind. I saw someone who had finally started choosing herself, and maybe, just maybe, was starting to choose me too. Our last night in San Diego felt like the kind you try to stretch. Neither of us said it out loud, but we both moved slower, like if we lingered in every moment just long enough, we could hold on to whatever we'd found out there by the ocean. Sophia stood near the hotel mirror, slipping earrings into place. She was wearing a backless black gown, one I hadn't seen before. Sleek, understated, but impossibly elegant. Her hair was pulled up loosely, a few strands falling around her collarbone. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, still buttoning my shirt, when she turned. "What?" she asked, catching me watching. "You look like yourself," I said. That made her pause. She smiled, soft and slightly surprised. "That's the best compliment I've gotten in a long time." Dinner was at a quiet rooftop place I found the night before. Nothing extravagant, just string lights, a view of the city, and a menu handwritten in chalk. We sat across from each other, the candles between us flickering just enough to feel cinematic. She was different that night, lighter but also more certain, like something had settled in her. The woman who first opened her door to me in tears in a cross-strapped dress was still there, but she'd grown into someone steadier. "I used to think healing would feel like an explosion," she said at one point, swirling the wine in her glass. "Like one big moment that would just change everything. And now I think it's more like letting things be quiet, letting yourself stop performing." I nodded. "You don't have to perform with me." "I know," she said, meeting my eyes. "That's why you scare me." I smiled gently, unsure if that was a compliment or a warning. Maybe both. We didn't rush through dinner. Afterward, we walked the long way back to the hotel, her heels clicking softly on the pavement, her hands slipping into mine without asking. The air was cooler, and she tucked her free hand under my arm as we passed an open jazz bar where music drifted through the doors like smoke. Back at the room, she stepped out onto the balcony. I followed her, both of us quiet, just watching the city light move and flicker like fireflies. After a while, she spoke. "You've given me something I didn't think I'd get back." "What's that?" "Hope." She turned to face me then, and her expression said everything her words hadn't. This wasn't casual. It wasn't a rebound. It wasn't some phase of feeling seen after being invisible for too long. It was her choosing something new with eyes wide open. We didn't say much as we moved back inside, the balcony door still cracked open to let the breeze in. She took her time slipping out of her dress, folding it over the back of a chair like it deserved care. I turned off the lights, leaving only the dim lamp by the bed. We lay there side by side for a long time, her back pressed against my chest, my hand resting on her hip, feeling her steady breath against my arm. It wasn't about what we did or didn't do. It was the closeness, the comfort, the way her fingers found mine in the dark and held on, like it was the first time she wasn't afraid to ask for that kind of connection. When we got back to Virginia, things didn't feel like they'd snapped back to normal. They felt better. We kept our rhythm, afternoon porch talks, shared dinners, slow walks, but something had shifted. Our conversations deepened. She asked about my childhood, about my parents, about the time I broke my wrist in middle school climbing a tree to impress a girl. I asked her about the first camera she ever owned, the apartment she lived in before Daniel, the tattoo on her side she got during a spontaneous weekend in her 20s and never told anyone about. We were unfolding for each other, one story at a time. I started leaving my tools in her shed. A hoodie or two found its way into her laundry basket. Her perfume started showing up on my clothes, even when I hadn't been inside that long. Then one night, while we were lying on her couch, legs tangled, Sophia whispered something as her fingers traced the edge of my hand. "This doesn't feel like healing anymore." "What does it feel like?" I asked. She looked at me, calm and certain. "Love," she said. "It feels like love." And I knew without a doubt she was right. The morning I proposed, the lake was quiet, just the sound of birds in the trees and the slow lap of water against the wooden dock. We walked along the gravel path that curled around the shoreline, our hands lightly brushing with each step. Sophia wore a flowing white summer dress, barefoot, her hair down and loose, catching in the breeze. She didn't know. I mean, maybe she suspected something. I'd been acting a little strange, checking my pocket too often, holding her hand a little tighter than usual. But she never said a word, just smiled like she already had everything she needed and didn't want to ruin whatever surprise was waiting. I stopped near the edge of the water, where the trees opened wide enough to give us a view of the full sky. She turned to me slowly, her eyes catching the light in that way that always stopped time. "I've always loved this place," she said. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the ring, a simple diamond on a thin gold band. No speech, no preamble, just the moment and us. When I dropped to one knee, her hand flew to her mouth. "I know I'm not who you expected," I said, "but I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Tears filled her eyes before I even asked. "Sophia Alvarez," I said softly, "will you marry me?" She didn't speak at first, just nodded, eyes wide, lips trembling, the kind of yes that didn't need sound. Then she dropped to her knees too and pulled me into her arms. "You're more than I ever thought I deserved," she whispered into my neck. "I never thought someone could see me fully and still want to stay." I pulled back just enough to look at her. "You never had to earn that. You just had to let someone show you." We stayed like that for a while, kneeling in the dirt, arms wrapped around each other, the sun climbing higher over the lake. It wasn't grand or dramatic. It was honest, real, and perfect. 6 months later, we got married in the same spot. Nothing big, just a few close friends, some of her family, a few of mine, and the sound of leaves rustling like applause. She wore an off-white dress with a low back and thin straps, the fabric catching the breeze as she walked barefoot down the makeshift aisle. She looked free, radiant, unapologetically herself. When she reached me, she leaned in and whispered, "I never thought I'd have this." I took her hand and whispered back, "You deserve it, all of it." Our vows weren't rehearsed. We didn't memorize anything. We just spoke from the chest, from everything we'd lived through together. Later, at the small reception under twinkling lights, Sophia danced with her niece to an old jazz song, laughing in a way that used to feel rare. I stood off to the side, watching her and realizing that all the quiet nights on the porch, all the small flowers, the walks, the conversations, they were the foundation of this joy, this peace, this beginning. After everyone had gone, we ended the night like we always did. Just the two of us on the porch, the sky pink and fading, wine in hand. Her head rested on my shoulder. I ran my fingers through her hair, absent-mindedly. "I used to think I was too late for this kind of life," she said. You're not late, I told her. You just took the long way. She looked at me with that knowing smile, the one she only gave me. Then in the kind of silence that only comes from absolute comfort, she said the words I'd never forget. I still remember the night you came over to borrow that wrench. I laughed quietly. Pretty good trade, huh? Best one I ever made, she said and kissed me. The sun dipped lower behind the trees. The air cooled and we just sat there, holding each other. The quiet was now something warm instead of something empty. A simple life, a soft evening, and the kind of love that grows slow and stays deep. The kind you don't expect, but when it finds you, you never let go.